If you want to stand out from the crowd, one way you can do it is visually. And so I think for these reasons, it's very important to not only design for commerce, but to build for design or for content. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can do both. I think it's important to have a website that functions well, that's going to be extremely efficient, but I think it should also, from a design perspective, be beautiful.
Welcome to the E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noibu, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have someone who worked for multiple years at the brand level in high fashion. Him and I actually know each other from a few years ago when we used to work together when Adrien was at the Webster. But now he's the CEO and founder of FAV Solution, which is a market leader in Shopify implementations, building and maintenance of websites. So welcome today, Adrien. Really excited to have you on.
Thank you so much, Kaylin, for having me today. Excited to be here with you.
Cool. So I always like to start off by learning a bit more about your background. Obviously, we hear that famous, very suave Parisian accent. I mentioned a bit about your time at the Webster. Why don't you take us a bit through your career journey and how you ended up in the States, Miami, and running your own agency?
Sure. So I'm French. I'm an engineer by training, and I moved to the US for the Webster back in 2016, end of 2015, beginning of 2016. The interesting thing is I took a detour in my career between 2013 and 2016, where I pursue my passion, which is photography. And when the Webster hired me, was to build and run their photo studio. After a year, and when that project was on rail, the CEO offered me to take on the entire e-commerce team and to help them build their digital strategy, which was a bit bigger than just e-commerce. It was e-commerce and marketplaces and some omnichannel activities. I took on that challenge. It was amazing, hard, rewarding. And one of the biggest challenges that I had in that position was finding good developers to help me build my product. And that's what led me to start FAV Solution later on. So I had that sort of parenthesis in my career, which was photography, which led me back to e-commerce and development, which was what I had initially studied.
I love that. You never know what you're going to get in life sometimes. Like you mentioned, now you're obviously running a super successful digital agency. So really, really love that journey. First question, obviously you've done a lot of digital strategy work down in your agency, but also prior at the Webster. How do you see brands looking to choose the right CMS? Like, what should everyone be in consideration for when they're looking at bringing in a platform or a CMS?
That's an excellent question. And I think that's one that any head of digital or VP or someone in charge of digital will have at some point. To me, the most important part is to define precisely your requirements. What are you trying to achieve? What are you doing on your website? Who is your audience? And when you lay that down, then you can choose the right one. More specifically, what should you think about when thinking about your requirements? Let's start with one that is not important. Back in the days, ease of use was a big one. I don't think it's relevant today anymore. I think every CMS is pretty user-friendly, and anybody with some sort of technical background can get very familiar with any CMS. So let's focus on the other ones. Scalability. How big is your business today? How long are you investing in that CMS for? And where do you want it to take you? What level of customization and flexibility would you like to have within that CMS? Do you want something that is fairly static but has the absolute best performance? Or on the other hand, do you want a CMS on which you'll be independent and that you'll be able to customize yourself? Integrations, I think, are extremely important too. What is your tech ecosystem? Are you a retailer with physical locations? Therefore, POS is going to be an important topic. So how well will that CMS integrate with POS so that you can have a true omnichannel experience, integrations with your ERP, integrations with your WMS. I'm thinking integrations are a big one. And then maybe another one would be how widespread the CMS is. Like how many brands, merchant companies are using it, and therefore how big is the community who can support you. Because if you go with the big CMS, then you'll find thousands of developers who can support you. And should you not be happy with the one you're working on, you can find another one. If you want to hire someone, it will be easy because there are many people with that knowledge. So that's something to consider. And I would say the last point would be in regards to the total cost of ownership. So what does the license cost? Are there hosting costs? What are the maintenance expense? Potential add-ons, modules, apps, whatever it may be. So that you have an idea of what it's going to cost you to run your business on that CMS.
Makes sense. And I think we hear the engineer in you kind of come out where it's like, hey, let's clearly define what we're looking to actually do. Let's understand the constraints. Obviously, if you're a 3-person D2C company versus a multinational with 150 retailers, an ERP that was built in the 70s, your requirements for a platform are going to be completely different. Having done obviously some digital strategy work and interfacing with a lot of brands and being at the brand level in the past yourself, have you ever seen an example of the wrong platform or the wrong CMS chosen at a brand level? And like, what impact did that have for the brand, right? Whether in the form of costs or in the form of just lack of flexibility and lack of ability to just kind of execute on their strategy?
Yes, I have seen that. And I would say that scalability, which was, I think, my first point, and integrations are the most frequent cases where you pick the wrong one. Typically, in terms of scalability, if you pick the wrong one, or let's say you're growing faster than expected, then the cost on the brand is that you have to rebuild earlier than you would thought. That has a financial cost, but that also has an indirect cost, which is it's going to keep your team busy on something that you did recently. You have to do it all over again, and they are not going to work on something else. And also, there is always data loss when you're doing a migration. I mean, in an ideal world, there is none, but the truth is there are some friction. There are some things lost in translations. It's never going to be, if you look at your analytics afterwards, it's never going to be a perfect smooth line when you transition from one to another one. In terms of integrations, same thing. You have not anticipated that you were running on an ERP from the 70s. And next thing you know, you are upgrading your ERP. That was on the roadmap, but you didn't think about it when you build your website. And now the new one is not extremely compatible with your CMS, but ERP is the core of the business. So probably more important than CMS, and definitely more challenging to change than the CMS. So then you have to do it again. And I would say in terms of cost or headaches for the company, they're about the same as the one for the first point.
No, that's great. And you actually touched on one of the next questions I had, which is data loss during migration. I mean, just the general theme of question for you. Do you think brands need to set the expectation that it's one step back, 2 step forward at launch? Launches are always hairy. You mentioned data loss. You have to rebuild all your analytics. There could be issues when you first launch. Like, how do you look at that, and how do you make sure you set the right expectations that, like, hey, conversion will probably decrease in the first week, but net, we're going to come out on top a couple of weeks or months later?
Pure data loss, you're going to have some discrepancies. One common that is a friction point for users are passwords. Most often, when you're migrating the user base, you're migrating the historical orders. But when it comes to password, it's a challenge. And in a lot of cases, you can't migrate them. So what you end up doing is next time they log in, they will be asked to reset the password. We can frame it in a nice way, or we can proactively email them. That's a typical friction point. In terms of SEO, also, if you prepare things right, you have a redirection plan and you're organizing everything with your redirects and stuff, but there will probably be a dip. And the most important thing is to be well prepared, and also to have as many eyes as possible on the website when you relaunch, and to take some very quick corrective measures, meaning that you have some reports running in analytics that will resurface any potential 404s. you run spider crawl on your new website to identify any broken links and you fix them. And I think that with the right tools and with eyes on the website, you can fix almost everything that is wrong in a few days or in a few weeks, and you can minimize that dip, and you can very soon be in the ROI positive territory when it comes to that migration or that rebuild or that redesign. Actually, I just want to say one more thing here. I think it's important not to do too many things at once. So my advice, when brand can afford it, is to do a rebuild or a replatform only, meaning not a redesign at the same time. I think it's good to just modify one parameter. So, okay, we're going to change the CMS, we're going to change the backend, we're going to improve the performance, but we're going to keep the same front end. And from there, when we know that we're stable and that SEO-wise and everything is perfect, then we start doing iterations on the design, and you can do true conversion rate optimization, because if you're changing too many parameters at once, you don't know what's working, what's not. And next thing you know, the revenue or the conversion rate is tanking after the migration. If you did a redesign at the same time, you don't know what's really affecting it.
By the way, I'm so happy you brought that up, because logically, and I've been in the room where people are planning these things and they go, well, why would we spend all this money to do a rewrite and make it look the same? Why not do both things at the same time? Which, by the way, sounds quite logical. To your point, and this is something I always advise our teams, if you change two things at once, you don't know what's broken. If you change the way that, for all intents and purposes, for the way that you sell, which could be through design and aesthetics, and you change the how you sell at the same time and it goes sideways, you actually don't know what the issue is. And it's a really, really, really good point. And it might be a bit counterintuitive, because then they might have to go redo all the design work. But I think when there's millions of dollars on the line, which typically there is in most e-com cases, I think you bring up a great point that I've seen done wrong so many times.
Absolutely. And the thing is, once you have properly migrated to your new platform, once you have a clean and optimized build, it's easy and less expensive to do these front-end changes. And you can do them with the data to back them, and you can A/B test some of them. Obviously, some of it you can do when you're rebuilding or replatforming. Like what's obviously wrong on the old site, you will change. But for the most part, I think it's best to keep it as is and do it in iterations in the second phase.
I love it. You mentioned visual and aesthetics. So I think we've seen brands like Walmart and Amazon that obviously haven't prioritized. There's nothing wrong with their websites. They're functional, they work, but they haven't really optimized kind of for design, we'll call it, right? And then you see other brands, part of, the Caring Group, LVMH, Richemont, where they spend a lot of time on their functional design of their boutiques and their website. How important do you think visual and aesthetics is to a brand and a website? And do you think it really depends on their strategy in terms of how much they should lean into it or not? Very curious to hear your thoughts on that.
How a website looks, or the visual or the design, I think is extremely important on many different levels. It's the first impression people are going to have with your brand. So that's what's going to stick with them. So it might as well look beautiful and make them want whatever that you're selling. In terms of user experience, something that is looking nice, that is easy to use, will naturally translate into more sales. You're also, this goes a bit with my first point, but you're also building a community around your brand, right? You want people to buy once, but you want them to buy again. You want to be part of your community. And that is something you will achieve with building or designing for content more than purely for commerce. And I think finally, it's going to give you a competitive edge. The market is quite crowded. There are less and less barriers to start an e-commerce business. So if you want to stand out from the crowd, one way you can do it is visually. So I think for this reason, it's very important to not only design for commerce, but to design for or to build for design or for content. I think, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can do both. I think it's important to have a website that functions well, that's going to be extremely efficient, but I think it should also, from a design perspective, be beautiful.
And just building on that, I think a lot of what you're saying is it really comes down back to the individual brands, like the retailer and what the retailer or the brand, what they're actually trying to accomplish. how do you explain the difference between really a site that's optimized for content for a retailer or a brand versus something that's optimized for commerce? How do you make that distinction when you're coming up with design and aesthetic plans? And yeah, very curious how you look at that, because I feel like I think everyone always says brands number one and aesthetics is number one, but then their bonuses are based on commerce goals. So I'm curious how you look at that, and yeah, very, very curious.
I mean, how we look at it or how we define it, I think it's based on the metrics and KPIs the brand are going to be monitoring. But if we step back a bit, before deciding for one or another, and I think you can do both, but usually there is one that is more important than the other one for you. Typically, your price point can influence which one you're going for. But what are the goals? When you're building for content, your goal is to increase your audience, make sure you have a really engaged community. So some KPIs that you're going to be looking at are, how big your audience is, growing your email database, growing your subscribers and followers, and growing their engagement. Not only having a big community, but having high open rates, having a lot of likes and shares, and trying to get them engaged by encouraging interactions and seeking feedbacks from them. While on the other hand, if you're optimizing for commerce, for e-commerce, then you're more in the typical conversion rate optimization playbook. So you're going to look at your funnel. You're going to look at where people are landing on the site. Are they visiting your collection pages? Are they going to your product pages? Are they adding to cart? Are they checking out? Understanding where you have friction points, and then you'll want to optimize there. But going back to what we said earlier in the conversation, I think important to do it with data to back it, and important to do it in small iterations and not too many things at once. And if we're talking KPIs for optimizing for commerce, I don't think conversion rate as a whole is the only metric, and I don't think you can only look at conversion rate. It doesn't mean much by itself. You want to look at your average order value. You want to look at your customer lifetime value. You want to look at your return on ad spend. And when talking about conversion rate, I think it's important to look at it from an acquisition channel perspective. Because quite often, I'll have a brand call me, conversion rate is tanking today, what's going on? And then I start diving a bit. First thing I will do is make sure everything's okay on the site, place an order. Okay, it goes through. Now I can look at the analytics, and then I'll notice they just launched a campaign on Meta or on TikTok, which are typically, higher in the funnel, gonna drive awareness, down the line some customers, but instantly what it does, it's driving traffic up, which does not translate immediately into sales.
No, that makes sense. And I think the prudence and the financial discipline that we're seeing in D2C brands in this year is probably a good example of what's to come for the next couple of years. So obviously everyone's watching conversion rates like a hawk. So as we look to really wrap up towards the end of this conversation, obviously really, really great insights so far. Adrien, from you, very curious to learn, what do you think some of the top challenges are for D2C brands this year? And any broad stroke piece of advice on how they could overcome them?
I mean, obviously the big challenge this year that started sort of last year is now brands are being asked by investors or founders or potential acquirers to generate growth while being profitable. While for a very long time, everybody was only focused on the growth on the top line and not really on the bottom line. And it's quite challenging to achieve both at the same time. And my advice for that is to look at the data and never take a decision based on your intuition or solely on your intuition or doing something because somebody else is doing it. I think that's the number one mistake I'm seeing is, oh, I saw this on that website. I want that on my website. But does that apply to your brand? Does that apply to your product? Does that resonate with your audience? I think you should always ask yourself these questions. You should always look for the data to make a decision or test something before you decide to roll it out to everybody. And I think when you're cautious and where you're trying to do things with a stronger argument than just, I think it looks nice or I saw it there, then you're putting yourself and your brand in a better position for success.
That's awesome. Very, very wise words. Appreciate your time today, Adrien. Very excited to listen back on this episode. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you, LinkedIn, FAV solution, FAV, how's the best? Email, LinkedIn, what do you prefer?
LinkedIn is great. Email is great. Adrien, it's ADRIEN at favsolution.com. FAV solution is FAVsolution.com.
Awesome. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
The e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's NOIBU.com. And then make sure to search for the e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.